Alright, y'all, so we are back here looking at Chapter 6. Again, we're looking at the American Revolution. So, at the end of Chapter 5, what did we finish up with? We finished up with the idea that the Americans had declared their independence, July 2nd, July 4th, however we look at it, of 1776, the Americans declared their independence. Okay, they said, Great Britain, England, we're no longer under your control. We are going to be independent. Basically, Mom and Dad, I don't need your help anymore. I'm going to move out. I'm going to be on my own. Right? Okay, so we declared our independence. But, again, what does that mean? Right? Y'all, as a teenager, many of you experience this, like, oh, I'm going to move out. I'm going to be on my own. And I'm going to look at different things. Okay? And, y'all, I realized just now that I need to shrink this and pull up the slideshow. Okay? But, y'all, again, American Revolution. You can say, oh, Mom and Dad, I'm going to do it. I'm going to be on my own, right? You can be on your own. You can move out and you can go do it. But when you go home every weekend and have Mom and Dad do your laundry and buy a bunch of your groceries, and then you come back on Sunday night to campus or to your apartment and you came home with a basket full of clean clothes and you came back with a whole bunch of food, are you really on your own, right? But no, if you move out and you want, right, so you can say you're on your own, but you got to kind of prove it, right? The whole world, when the whole world realizes that mommy is still doing your laundry and dad's still buying your groceries, well then what? People aren't really going to look at you as being independent, right? If they're still paying all your bills, they're paying, yeah, you moved out, you're on your own, but they pay your rent. Well, that's not really being on your own, right? So again, we look at it. Now, when we talk about this, let's look at a few things, y'all. A couple general concepts, y'all. Who are the different people? Does everybody in the colonies want independence? Not exactly. So how many people were in favor of this independence? Only about a third. Okay, a third are in favor of independence. A third are against it, want to remain loyal. Those are going to be known as, those people who want to remain loyal are also known as loyalists, aka Tories. People who want independence are known as patriots or Whigs. Okay, there's a reason behind that, y'all, but excuse me, we don't need to go into that. Okay, but we have the loyalists, aka Tories, and we have the patriots, aka Whigs. Something that's going to be important, y'all, is that even though only a third of the American colony, or a third of the people want independence, and the same amount, basically a third, want to remain part of the English colonies, the British don't use those loyalist Tories very effectively. So again, a third are in favor of independence, a third of them against, and a third are neutral. Okay, a third just like, I really don't know. Like, I'm not sure if we should. Now, a couple things. Number one, the loyalists, like I said, are not used effectively by the British. And number two, a lot of loyalists will actually leave and move to Canada. Many loyalists who had the ability to will leave the 13 colonies and move to Canada because they're like, look, I want to stay a part of the, I don't want to declare my independence, and so I'm going to go to a place where other people agree with me, and they move to Canada. Okay. Now, very few outsiders and even some Americans did not believe they could really beat the British. Y'all, at this point in time, the British is one of the most powerful militaries in the world. Again, they defeated the Great Spanish Armada, right? So, the British military, especially, or in particular the British Navy, is seen as one of the most powerful forces in the world. Here we are, the 13 ragtag colonies. Very few people outside of the colonies, and even many people inside of the colonies, didn't believe that the Americans really could achieve true independence. But as we will see, the Americans lose most of the battles, but still won, because they eventually break the British's will to fight. The way I like to equate this, y'all, is when you play against, you ever played a child in like a game of checkers or something, like any game that you can play with a child, right? Well, you play and you win and you win, like you win every game, like you win, and then all of a sudden you say, you know what, I'm done. And what does the child come back with response of? Oh, you just want to quit because you know I'm about to beat you, right? They didn't win any of the games. They didn't win any battle. But you're the quitter, right? You quit on it. You lost the will to continue to play. That's what's going to happen with the British, okay? The Americans aren't going to lose every single battle, but they lose a lot of them. But the British ultimately will lose the war because they lose the desire, they lose the will to fight. Okay? Now, we also have to understand that the American Revolution was truly that. It was a revolution on all aspects of America. It was not simply just the war. The American Revolution was more than just a war. It was a revolution on all levels. It changed class systems, political systems, and created a new sense of nationalism with a unique form of, what's our big theme? Consensual self-government. Okay? So it created a new sense of nationalism with a unique form of consensual self-government. Okay? So that kind of sets our stage. Now, let's move on, y'all. I'm going to break down, and I want you to understand this, y'all. I'm basically going to break the war down by years, okay? And we're going to talk about 76, 77, then 78, and once we get to 78, we kind of lump some stuff together, okay? So I'm not going to look at every single year individually, but I do break it down by years so that we can kind of keep track of what's going on. So, 1776, I like to look at this as George Washington's close call, okay? The war is going to move to New York. Think about where we've seen most of the war being fought. In and around Boston, right? We talked about the Boston Tea Party. Then Lexington and Concord. Those are suburbs of Boston. Then we had what? The Battle of Bunker Hill. Again, right outside of Boston. So Boston has been our center, our epicenter. And remember this. Whenever we talk about American history, who are our stuff starters in American history? What states always seem, our colonies seem to start stuff? Massachusetts, South Carolina. Keep that in mind. Look, hey, we see, where's this stuff really getting going? Where's this American Revolution really seeing its most fervent action? In and around Boston and Massachusetts, right? So anyway, Washington's close call. The war moves to New York. The colonists want to keep it under their control. But remember, it's a big British army town, so they want it too. Okay, so the British want to control New York. The colonists want to protect it. Okay, so it's a big British army town, so they want it too. The British leaders, William Howe, who's leading the army, and Richard Howe, who's leading the navy. So General William Howe is leading the army. Admiral Richard Howe is leading the navy. They come over and they defeat George Washington, but they don't deliver a knockout punch. He lives to fight another day, and now he can recover and regroup. I want you to understand this, y'all. George Washington is, for those of you who are sports fans, hopefully you understand this. George Washington is very much Drew Brees, okay? And what I mean by that is, y'all, if personally I'm not a Saints fan, but if you've paid attention to sports, if you pay attention to New Orleans Saints football, you understand what over the last 10 to 15 years. I say 10 to 15 years, but that's pretty close to 15. Katrina was 15 years ago, so yeah. What we're looking at is over the last dozen or so years, regardless of what's going on for the New Orleans Saints, people have said, as long as they have Drew Brees, they have a chance. But if Drew Brees went down with an injury, people are like, there goes the season. Game's over. Game's over. Season's over. We don't have a shot, right? That has been the mentality for many people who pay attention to Saints. Well, yeah, that's George Washington. George Washington quickly recognizes his importance and his Continental Army's importance, which is basically he can lose a battle. What he can't do is surrender. What he can't do is get beat and get conquered. If he loses a battle, no big deal. But George Washington has to be around. His army has to be there, because as long as his army exists, the Americans believe they have a chance. As long as his army exists, the British know they have someone to fight. But if George Washington gets conquered and is forced to surrender, who's left to fight? Right? So George Washington recognizes that. And that's a big thing. So the Howes beat him. They defeat him. But he's able to, in essence, escape. He's able to maneuver his troops out. He loses a battle, but he doesn't lose all of his army. He basically loses nothing more than land. Now, George Washington goes across the Delaware River to regroup during the winter. Usually no fighting happens, and so the British are also resting. But Washington knows he needs to do something to lift spirits. They really haven't won anything. Did they win at Bunker Hill? No. I mean, it was a moral victory because they took a lot of casualties against the British, but or they forced the British into a lot of casualties. Lexington and Concord. Can we reclaim that as a victory? Well, maybe Ticonderoga, but there's not a whole lot of victory. So Washington knows he needs to do something to kind of lift spirits. The way I think about this, y'all, is again, I like to make sports references. I think about that team that's losing 21-0 at halftime. They're losing 21-0, going into halftime. They are just losing horribly. But right before halftime, they kick a field goal. And so now going into halftime, it's actually going to be 21-3. Well, hey, we got momentum. We got something. We started something, right? It wasn't a total failure. We didn't completely get shut out in the first half. That's kind of the essence of what we see. So Washington goes across the Delaware River to group during the winter. Usually no fighting happens. The British are also resting. But Washington knows he needs to do something to lift spirits. They hadn't won anything yet. So he surprise attacks Trenton, New Jersey on Christmas night. And it was a good victory. It's wintertime. It's the holidays. Nobody attacks during that time. But Washington leads a surprise sneak attack on Trenton on Christmas night of 1776. Okay? And ultimately, it's a good victory. Then a week later, what's a week after Christmas? New Year's, right? So a week later, they attack Princeton, New Jersey, and have good results as well. This time, they use the leave the fires burning routine. Basically like, okay, we're going to leave the fires over here, and we're going to leave them burning, leave a couple people there to make a whole bunch of noise, make them think we're still here, and then we're going to come around and sneak attack them from the other direction, right? So that kind of mentality. But again, a week later, they attack Princeton and have good results as well. They use the leave the fires burning ruse to surprise the British. Now Americans are ending 76, starting 77 on a slightly positive note. Again, it's not anything major. Trenton and Princeton are not earth-shattering victories, but it did something to lift the spirits. Now, during the winter of 1776 and 77, two big issues became obvious for the Americans. Okay, number one. Okay, trying to look at it. Number one. The Continental Congress had very little money to pay soldiers or obtain supplies. It's becoming very obvious that the Continental Congress doesn't have a lot of money. Yeah, they got George Washington to lead the army because they knew he had money. We know John Hancock has money. But, that's two guys. That's maybe not enough money to do everything that's necessary to fund the military. Okay? And then the second thing is that diseases like smallpox and short enlistment terms were hurting the numbers of the American military. Today when you join the military, a lot of times you sign up for a 4-year hitch, or you sign up for a 4-year term, or maybe a 6-year term, right? You sign up for a length of years. Well, during this American Revolution, during this early stage here in 1776, people were signing up for 6 months at a time. So if you signed up right after the Declaration of Independence, or let's change that, you signed up right after you heard about Bunker Hill. This is June of 70. Let's go with the Declaration of Independence in July of 76. That's going to be what? 6 months from July of 76, we're talking January. So if you just signed up for 6 months, by the time we have to Trenton and Princeton, basically you go home. Well, how was Washington supposed to fight if people weren't there? Okay? So as spring arrives, new recruits come in. So that's a really tough winter, but as spring starts to roll around, as we get further into 1777, as spring arrives, new recruits come in because Congress offered them $20 and 100 acres. Congress doesn't have money to offer these people, but what do they have? They see all this land out here. They see all that land and like, I want some of that. So they offer, Congress will offer new recruits $20 and 100 acres of land if they serve for 3 years or until the war was over. So now Washington has people to work with. Now, something else I want to mention here. It's important to remember that while George Washington leads the Continental Army, there are many militia groups that still exist and will fight on their own, not as a part of the regular army. So yeah, George Washington is fighting over in and around New York right now. But the Lexington militia is still hanging out around Boston, right? We might see the Charleston, South Carolina militia still managing their little territory, right? So there's a bunch of militias that still existed and are ultimately fighting their own little battles. So not everybody, it's not like the entire army is right there fighting with George Washington. But the Continental Army under George Washington's direction is the largest force that the colonists will put together. Okay? So now we look at 1777. Okay? As we move into 1777, the British want to cut New England off from the rest of the colonies. Right? Where's all the trouble coming from? Those people up in Boston, right? The Boston Massacre, then the Boston Tea Party, then Lexington. It's all these people in Boston. It's all these New Englanders, right? They're the ones causing all the trouble. So the British want to cut New England off from the rest of the colonies. So they set up a three-prong attack. Y'all, I'll show you something in a minute, but let me just read through the notes. So they set up a three-prong attack. General William Howe will go north from the New Jersey, Pennsylvania area, while General Burgoyne comes south from Canada, and Lieutenant St. Leger comes in from the northwest. All would meet up and cut off New England. But ultimately, they will fail. Y'all, I have this map here. You can see it. Okay, whatever. I'm going to back out of this for just a second, and I'm going to pull up handy-dandy paint, right? Who doesn't love paint? So, what are we seeing here? They want to cut off New England. Where's New England? It's this it's this part of the country right here. So what do we see happening? Okay, we see William Howe will go north from New Jersey, Pennsylvania. So we got New Jersey, Pennsylvania. He's going to go north, right there. You know, you can see, if you magnify the map on your own PowerPoint, you can kind of see what I'm talking about. He's going to go north. Then what do we have? We have General Burgoyne, who's going to come south from Canada. Boom. And then, lastly, we're going to have Lieutenant St. Leger, who's going to come around from the northwest. And all of them are going to do what? They're all going to meet up in this region and separate New England from the rest of the colonies. Think about it like this, y'all. When you were in elementary school, or whatever the case may be, and there's that one kid who's acting up. It's not all the students in the class, it's just that one. Maybe those two kids who are acting up. What's the teacher do? Tries to isolate them. Put them off by themselves, right? Keep them away from all the other kids who are doing things the right way. That's what the British are doing. They're saying, New England is the troublesome kid. New England's the troublemaker, so what are we going to do? We're going to separate them. We're going to isolate them. So, again, Howe is going to go north from Pennsylvania, New Jersey. Burgoyne is going to come south from Canada. And St. Leger is going to come in from the northwest. All of them are going to meet up and ultimately block off New England. Okay? So, that is the plan. Sorry, let me swap that, y'all. But, again, this is going to fail. Okay? This is ultimately going to fail. Why? Because, y'all, doing something like that has to have, like, perfect timing. Okay? So, let's look at it. Howe wants to capture Philadelphia because it's seen as the capital city. Where's the Continental Congress meeting? In Philadelphia. Where are the leaders of... Everything's kind of happening in Philadelphia. So, while Philadelphia is not an official capital at this point, General Howe sees Philadelphia as the capital of the American colonies. So he wants to conquer it. What better symbol to exert your force is to conquer somebody else's capital, right? So Howe wants to capture Philly because it's the capital city. But he takes a long time and never actually gets to meet Burgoyne and St. Leger. Then, when we look at Burgoyne, the guy coming south, Burgoyne moves really slow because of all of his stuff. Burgoyne brings a whole bunch of stuff, y'all. He brings his silverware set. He has a mistress along on the trip with him. He brings his entire personal library. Yo, if you have to have other soldiers carry your stuff for you because you're the leader, and they're going through really, really bad trails and like just going through the middle of nowhere, going through the woods, do you think maybe you could leave your personal books back at home, or maybe you don't need your fancy silverware? No. This dude, Burgoyne, is going to bring all of his comforts of home with him. So that move makes him and all of his troops move slowly. Eventually, Burgoyne will meet too much resistance, some forces led by Benedict Arnold, and he begins to retreat. He retreats to Saratoga. Okay? There, in October of 1777, General Burgoyne will surrender to Benedict Arnold and Horatio Gates. Y'all, Saratoga is a huge turning point in the war. This is big. Okay? This is a big deal. What we ultimately see happening is that here in October 77, at the surrender of Saratoga, this is a turning point. Benedict Arnold, Horatio Gates now accept the surrender of General Burgoyne. Why, though, is it this big turning point? Simple fact. Now, who has been involved in this war to this point in time? The American colonists versus the British, right? Now, France thinks the Americans have a chance, and they openly support the American cause. Had the French kind of been helping us? Maybe a little bit. They kind of been helping where they could. But let's look at it on a real level. The French, just a few years earlier, right? About a dozen years earlier, in 1763, lost the French and Indian War. I say a dozen years, 14 years, I guess now. Treaty of Paris, 1763, the French get completely kicked out of North America. Now, what do we see? We see the French saying, how can we pay the British back? How can we get revenge on the British? Those American colonies, they're fighting for independence. Let's go in and let's help them. So now France thinks that the Americans, after the surrender at Saratoga, France thinks the Americans have a chance, and they openly support the American cause. We get what's called the Treaty of Alliance between France and the United States. Now, keep in mind, France also has an alliance with Spain, and that's going to be important later on. So we'll get to that later. But what we see is that the Americans make a deal with France, but France also has another friend in Spain, and they'll kind of, the friend of our friends always kind of impacts us a little bit, right? Like, that's how I like to think about it. So what did this Treaty of Alliance say? Well, it said that we would fight until freedom was won and both sides agreed to terms with England. France said they didn't want to gain any territory in North America. So again, like, they've been kicked out of North America for the last 14 years. So like, look, we're not looking to go back and retake land. We just want to see the British suffer. They kicked us out of North America. We want to punish them. Any way we can get back at them, any way we can get revenge on them, that's what we want. Now, when we also look at it, y'all, it's kind of a weird alliance between the American colonies and France. Okay? Why? Well, France has a king and is a Catholic country. The American colonies are fighting against the king, and the American colonies were Protestant. Okay? Plus, it was just 14 years earlier that we finished fighting. That the British colonists, think about it, George Washington, who's the leader of the American Continental Army, was in essence one of the players that started the French and Indian War against the French, right? So we just finished fighting them in the French and Indian War. But all of this boils down to, y'all, is that the French really, really hate the British, and they will do anything they can to make them suffer. Again, y'all, I use this phrase a lot, but the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? So I don't like you, but I hate them, and you hate them. So while me and you don't get along, since we both hate that person over there, we can agree to go after that person together. And that's what we see happening here. France and the American colonies might not have a lot in common, but they have a common enemy, and so they share that. Okay? Now, then we get the winter of 1777-78. This is the winter that we've all heard of that took place at Valley Forge, right? So winter of 1777 and 78, some really hard times. George Washington and his men stayed at Valley Forge. They are low on morale and supplies. Y'all, again, yeah, the victory at Saratoga is great, but the rest, what else do they have to hang their hat on? That's a super powerful victory, but they don't have much else. So they're low on morale, they're low on supplies, sanitation is really bad, so there's a lot of health problems. But we get a little help towards the end of the winter from a guy by the name of Baron von Steuben. Okay, it looks like Steuben, but pronounced Steuben, right? So Baron is not his name, Baron is his title. So Baron whatever von Steuben, okay? Was it Friedrich von Steuben? Anyway, he comes in. He's a former Prussian officer, and if you don't understand that, y'all, Prussia was like Germany before Germany was called Germany, right? So, and if you know anything about European geography, Germany is right in the middle of Europe, which means they're always surrounded, and so whenever anybody's fighting in Europe, they're usually around Germany, and so Germany develops, Prussia at this time, develops a really, really super powerful, super strong, very well respected military, Okay, so Baron von Steuben, a former Prussian officer, comes over. He trains and drills the soldiers to prepare them for war. So you got this guy who's basically an expert in war coming over to train the American colonists, to train the American army, and show them, look, this is how you handle these things. This is what you do. And it really prepares the Americans moving forward. Overall, the winter at Valley Forge was a tough time, but those who survived are ready and willing to fight. So those who survive are ready and willing to fight. Now, at the beginning of 1778, George Washington, at the beginning of 1778, the British General William Howe resigns. Okay, at the beginning, now we're looking at 1778. At the beginning of 1778, the British General William Howe resigns, and a man by the name of Sir Henry Clinton takes over. So Henry Clinton takes over. He will fight. Henry Clinton will take over and fight against George Washington in the north, and ultimately we get a stalemate, y'all. Neither side's making much progress. When we talk about a stalemate, y'all, the American colonists are going to win a little battle here and take a little land. Then the British are going to come back and win a battle and take that land. So it's kind of back and forth, back and forth. Nobody's really making a lot of progress. So we have this northern stalemate. And it's basically going to stay like that for the next 3 years. Washington is going to fight Clinton up in the north, and it goes kind of tit for tat. Like, hey, look, I win here, you win there, you come back and win here, then I come back and win there, right? It's this back and forth. So we get a stalemate in the north. But we also see some frontier actions, y'all. When I talk about the frontier, I want you to think about the British territory. At this point in time, British territory kind of ended with the Mississippi River. So when we talk about the frontier, we're talking places that are like out in Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, or modern day Ohio, Indiana, Illinois. That region of the country, right? So think around the Great Lakes and that sort of area. So we get the frontier actions. A man by the name of George Rogers Clark led a group of frontiersmen out to the northwest. Again, places like Illinois and or what is today modern day Illinois and Indiana. And he won. Okay, so Washington is at a stalemate. George Rogers Clark goes out into the frontier in this era, 1778 through 81. Again, y'all, I told you we kind of lump up some years here, and this is where we get it. But George Rogers Clark leads a group of frontiersmen out to the northwest and ultimately won there. Okay. Now, the next thing we're going to look at is going to be the South. I'm going to save that for part 2 of this video, so I'm going to shut down, and this is going to be the end of chapter 6, part 1. I will do part 2 in the next video.